This week in the trial against Thomas Cashman, Thomas Cashman takes the stand. Mr. Cooper starts by asking about his family. Once Thomas Cashman confirms he was born in Liverpool, Mr. Cooper says, "That really is your home all of your life." Thomas Cashman agrees. "I want to ask you about your family. Your mum and dad brought you up?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Yes, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, Kevin and Leanne. I also have 2 half-siblings, Colleen and Stephen." Mr. Cooper asks him about Kevin Dunn, and Mr. Cashman says he is aged around 42 years old. Colleen Cashman, a half-sibling, is 35 years old. "How close are you to your brother and sisters? Is it a good relationship?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Yeah, very good," says Thomas Cashman. "Your parents' relationship?" Cashman says his mum and dad separated. He was quoted as saying, "Not for our whole childhood, they separated and they got back together." Mr. Cooper says, "How old were you when you left school?" Thomas Cashman says, "I left school when I was 13 or 14. Mr. Cooper asks, "Did you ever go back to school?" "No," says Thomas Cashman. "How old were you when you got your first job?" asked Mr. Cooper. "I was 16, delivering newspapers for a local shop," says Thomas Cashman. "Did you move on to other work then?" says Mr. Cooper. "I worked on a car wash at Princess Drive, yeah, just washing cars," says Thomas Cashman. "When you left the car wash, did you go on to other work?" asked Mr. Cooper. "I went from washing cars to working in Wales on a fair," says Thomas Cashman. "Did you get homesick?" asked Mr. Cooper. "It was too far up and down all the time. I just give in with it," says Thomas Cashman. "How old were you when you were working in Wales at the fair?" asked Mr. Cooper. "I'm not too sure. About 16 or 17, says Thomas Cashman. "When did you first start smoking cannabis?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Round about that time. I was smoking every day, yeah," says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then asks, "Who's Kaylee?" "Kaylee's my partner. I moved to Hoyton in 2000. I met Kaylee in 2001. I was about 11 or 12, says Thomas Cashman. You were only 11 and 12 at the time, but did you immediately get on?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Yes," says Thomas Cashman. "As you got older, did you remain friends?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Yes, I've been with Kaylee from then till now," says Thomas Cashman. "When did things start getting attentive? I wouldn't say sexual at this stage as you were children. When did you realise there was an attraction?" asked Mr. Cooper. "When we were younger, we were just kids messing about. When I was about 14, 15, we started doing things we shouldn't have been," says Thomas Cashman. "You were childhood sweethearts," says Mr. Cooper. "Yeah," says Thomas Cashman. "You met as kids, you grew up together and were attracted to each other," says Mr. Cooper. "Yeah," says Thomas Cashman. "Has there ever been a time in your life when Kaylee hasn't been a part of it?" says Mr. Cooper. "When we were younger, we'd always split up for a bit, but we'd always end up back together," says Thomas Cashman. "Are you still with her?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Yes," says Thomas Cashman. "Has she been attending court?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Every day, yes," says Thomas Cashman. "Did you start living together?" asked Mr. Cooper. "Yes," says Thomas Cashman. "When did that happen?" asked Mr. Cooper. "I'm not really sure. Late teens, 20, something like that, about 19 or something," says Thomas Cashman. When you returned from Wales and the fair, you started smoking cannabis regularly. Did you continue when you returned to Liverpool? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. How old were you then? Asked Mr. Cooper. 16, 17, 17, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Did there come a time when you started selling it? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yes, I started selling cannabis when I was about 18, says Thomas Cashman. Why did you start selling cannabis? Asked Mr. Cooper. Because I smoked it every day. I was selling cannabis and smoking my profit, says Thomas Cashman. To begin with, was it on a major scale or small scale stuff? Asked Mr. Cooper. Small scale, 10 bags, 20 bags, green, skunk, says Thomas Cashman. How much were you making a week or a month? Asked Mr. Cooper. I was basically smoking my profit. I wouldn't have much. 50 quid and I'd keep the rest. I'd smoke the profit, says Thomas Cashman. Was there any time after you started this route down the road with cannabis when you stopped? Asked Mr. Cooper. I stopped selling cannabis when my missus got pregnant with my little boy. I just needed to change my life around, basically. I didn't want her to just keep selling cannabis. I've got 2 children now, a little boy and a little girl. My boy's 14 and my girl's 4. When I was arrested, I was with them, with my family, at home, says Thomas Cashman. When Kaylee became pregnant with your son, did she want to settle in Liverpool? Asked Mr. Cooper. We were living in Liverpool at the time. It was a local area where we've always lived, so yeah, says Thomas Cashman. At one stage you lived in Runcorn, didn't you? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Then you got the keys to Grenadier Drive, says Mr. Cooper. Yes, says Thomas Cashman. Did you move into Grenadier Drive about Christmas 2021? Asked Mr. Cooper. It was just after Christmas, just before New Year, says Thomas Cashman. At that stage, what was the level of your cannabis dealing? Asked Mr. Cooper. It was a high level, says Thomas Cashman. Over what period did it go from the lower level dealing you described as smoking your own profits to the high level? Asked Mr. Cooper. It was the older I got, the more sensible I was. I only ever sold it in my area where I'd been brought up. Everyone I sold it to, I knew. I ended up selling it in large amounts, says Thomas Cashman. You accept you were a cannabis dealer, states Mr. Cooper. Yes, I was a cannabis dealer, says Thomas Cashman. At the time of this tragic event, were you a cannabis dealer? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yes, I was, says Thomas Cashman. Were you a high-level cannabis dealer? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yes, I was selling kilos of skunk and pollen, one like grass and one's like solid. I was selling it in kilos, says Thomas Cashman. You sold it to people in your area? Asked Mr. Cooper. Only people in my area, yeah. My area is called Finchley, like Finch Lane. That's the area. Finch Lane, Princess Drive. Things like that, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. How would it work? It's not like people go into a shop. People obviously buy it off you. How did it happen? Asked Mr. Cooper. It depends. Sometimes I'll get them to my sister's house on Mab Lane. Sometimes I would take them to their house, says Thomas Cashman. At this point, Mr. Cooper asks him to keep his voice up. He says, this is important and it may become more important later. He then asks, why would you sometimes take the drugs to your sister's house? My sister lived with her boyfriend. She was only there a couple of days a week. I'd get up and I'd go, first, to my sister's house, says Thomas Cashman. Why? Asked Mr. Cooper. It's just somewhere where I'd plot off. It weren't always left at my sister's house. I'd get someone to drop them off at my sister's house and within the hour they'd be gone from my sister's house, says Thomas Cashman. Where would you take them? Asked Mr. Cooper. Snowbury Road or Nicky McHale's. It was a stash house where I'd stash my drugs or money. A stash house, a safe house, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then asked about Cashman's sister's house. My sister's boyfriend was an ex-police officer. He's retired now. He was for 15 years. When he would show up, I'd always have people around the house. I'd always have my mates round. He didn't like it. He'd get on my sister about it. They were always having arguments about me being there, says Thomas Cashman. Did you use other addresses to house your drugs? Asked Mr. Cooper. I was stuck in a rut. I would come out the house, go to my sister's, and have people come to my sister's. I'd work from my sister's, says Thomas Cashman. Did she tell you to stop doing it? Asked Mr. Cooper. She said I had to stop having people around the house, and yes I did. That was on the day of the 22nd. I went in, see my sister, and she told me she'd been having an argument with her boyfriend. She told me stop having people around my house. Was there a time when drugs were kept at your brother's house? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, but for them. I would supply my brother's mates and my mates who lived down my brother's Kevin's house, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Was Kevin aware? Asked Mr. Cooper. Kevin didn't agree with it. He was never there. Kevin got on with his girlfriend. His two mates kept living at the address. He's not stupid. He did find out and he did warn me more than once. He didn't agree with it, says Thomas Cashman. Around August the 22nd, 2022, how much money were you making? Asked Mr. Cooper. I was making between $3,000 to $5,000 a week, says Thomas Cashman. What would you do with this money? Asked Mr. Cooper. I'd buy cars, bikes, save some, go on holidays. Just spend it on stuff I enjoyed, basically, says Thomas Cashman. Effectively, this cannabis dealing involves you walking the streets of your patch, says Mr. Cooper. Yeah, only my area only. I never sold it anywhere but my area, says Thomas Cashman. It was just kilos to my mates who I grew up with all my life. Maybe 5 or 6 people, all in the same area, yeah. What quantity were you dealing in, say per week? Asked Mr. Cooper. Say between 5 kilos, maybe 6 kilos a week on skunk. Then I'd get a couple of kilos of pollen as well. A range of 5 to 10, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then starts to ask about Joseph Nee and Joseph Nee's family. They're all my friends. They have been for the past 10 years, says Thomas Cashman. How did you meet? Asked Mr. Cooper. We just live in the same area. We got to know each other through living in the same area as each other, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then asks if he has any issues with Joseph Nee. Cashman replies, no, I've never had problems with Nee's family ever. They've always been my friends. Mr. Cooper then asks what he spoke to Nee's family about. Thomas Cashman says, mostly cars and bikes and things like that. They like motorbikes and cars, and I have motorbikes and cars. I'd see them a lot, like, yeah. I know where his mum's house is. I know where a couple of the brothers live. The day before, I was at his mother's house with the brothers, with Joseph and Jamie as well. Mr. Cooper asks, did Joseph Nee spend a lot of time at his mum's house? I'm not sure, says Thomas Cashman. Or his brother's house? Asked Mr. Cooper. From what I knew, he's always been local, yeah. They've always lived on Dovecot. They've always lived local, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. You know exactly where to find him, says Mr. Cooper. If I was driving round and I'd see them, I'd always stop and speak to them, says Thomas Cashman. The day before, you're at Joseph Nee's mother's home with Joseph Nee? Asked Mr. Cooper. His brothers as well, Jamie and Scott and Robert, says Thomas Cashman. At the family home? Nothing unusual about that? Says Mr. Cooper. No, says Thomas Cashman. What were you all talking about? Asked Mr. Cooper. Jamie Nee just got a brand new Audi RS6. They were talking about his new car that he's just got, says Thomas Cashman. Was it friendly? Asked Mr. Cooper. Course, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Any problems? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, nothing whatsoever. When you parted company on August 21st, 2022, how were things between you? Asked Mr. Cooper. Oh, good. Same as every time we see each other, says Thomas Cashman. Do you know Paul Abraham? Asked Mr. Cooper. He liked his drink a lot. You'd see him in a nice way. He'd be pissed. I'd never stop and speak to him, says Thomas Cashman. Do you know Timothy Naylor? Asked Mr. Cooper. I knew him since I was a kid, yeah. I know him as Timmy. I just know him from the area. We'll stop, ask each other how we are. I never go out and socialise with him. That's about it, says Thomas Cashman. Ever had any problems with them? Asked Mr. Cooper. Never, no, says Thomas Cashman. As far as the Korbel family are concerned, do you know them? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, I did not know them, says Thomas Cashman. Did you know Ryan Conway? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, I knew him for years. He's my best friend's cousin's best friend, says Thomas Cashman. I had no problem whatsoever with him. Mr. Cooper then asks about the witness who can't be identified. Did you ever make any confession of any type about the events on the 22nd? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, I didn't make no explanations at all, whatsoever. I didn't see her that night, says Thomas Cashman. How did you get to know the witness? I got to know her through her partner, Paul, says Thomas Cashman. I'd sell cannabis to Paul Russell. When I'd go round to see him about cannabis, I'd speak to his girl, and I got to know her a bit better. I knew Paul Russell since I moved around that area as well over 10 years ago. He sells cannabis, says Thomas Cashman. To what level did Paul Russell sell cannabis? Asked Mr. Cooper. He sells it in kilos himself to other people, but he also sells it in 20 bags, 50 bags, ounces, stuff like that, says Thomas Cashman. He confirms that he supplied Paul Russell with cannabis. Mr. Cooper asked him about how much cannabis he would supply. It depends what he wanted at the time, says Thomas Cashman. Approximately, how many times did you take him cannabis? Asked Mr. Cooper. I couldn't say, says Thomas Cashman. Did there come a time where he owed you money? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yes, 25,000. I gave him 5 kilos of cannabis, skunk, about 3 weeks prior. The rest of his sentence is inaudible, and I'm unable to confirm what he said at this point. On August the 22nd, 2022, had he paid this money? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, he hadn't paid it, no, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper returns to the anonymous witness and how he got to know her, and Cashman says, I'd go round and see Paul Russell and she'd be at the house. That's the only way I can explain it, at her house. I think it was a council house. They were boyfriend and girlfriend, says Thomas Cashman. When you first met her through Paul Russell, did you act together as a threesome, go out drinking or whatever? Asked Mr. Cooper. We was never going out socialising together, no. She'd be in the house. I'd always speak to her when I'd go and see Paul Russell, says Thomas Cashman. Was there any other reason you were going round to see Paul Russell? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, I've never socialised with Paul. I'd go round, I'd see him, I'd sell him cannabis. I'd go round and have a little spliff with him, says Thomas Cashman. Did there come a time when matters developed between you and her? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yes, says Thomas Cashman. How did that start? Asked Mr. Cooper. I was going round there. One time I went round, I asked for Paul. She said she's sick of him and she wanted a real man, things like that. I just said, okay, sound. She said, why don't you come round later? Come and have a split with me, says Thomas Cashman. Let's be frank about this. Were you attracted to her? Asked Mr. Cooper. Not at first, no, says Thomas Cashman. She said to you she was sick of Paul and wanted a real man, says Mr. Cooper. She said she wanted a real man, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. How did you feel when she said that? Asked Mr. Cooper. To be honest with you, I didn't like it at first. I thought I wouldn't like my missus saying that about me to one of my mates. I ignored it, says Thomas Cashman. Nothing really happened there and then? Asked Mr. Cooper. Nothing happened, no. Did she ask you to do anything? Asked Mr. Cooper. She asked me that time to come round, but I never went round. I just left it. I seen her a couple more times and she was saying the same things basically. She just said to come round and to have a spliff and chill with her. I knew where it was going, so I didn't go, says Thomas Cashman. Did you want it to go where you thought it was going? Asked Mr. Cooper. Not at that stage, no. I knew I would end up sleeping with her if I went round, says Thomas Cashman. You declined her invitation? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yes, says Thomas Cashman. How was your relationship with Kaylee? Asked Mr. Cooper. My relationship was good, says Thomas Cashman. Did you have any intention of leaving Kaylee or your family for anyone? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, never. Nobody whatsoever, says Thomas Cashman. During the time she was coming on to you, was Paul Russell aware of this? Asked Mr. Cooper. Not at first, no, says Thomas Cashman. How long did that process take? Asked Mr. Cooper. I'm not sure. I just remember seeing her one day. She'd been doing her personal training. She was like, get round to ours. She had a nice bum, basically, seen her bum and thought, do you know what? I'm going to go round and see her. Again, Mr. Cooper asked him to keep his voice up. You went round? Asked Mr. Cooper. I went round later on that night and we slept together, says Thomas Cashman. Where was Paul Russell? Asked Mr. Cooper. He was fishing, says Thomas Cashman. You had sex with her? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Was that the first time you had sex with her? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, says Thomas Cashman. Did it continue? Asked Mr. Cooper. It did, yeah. It was a lot more than 3. I can't put a figure on it, no. It was a lot more than 3. It was over a good period of time, I'm not sure. Time goes quick outside. When I was looking through my papers, she suggested it was June 2020. I was having sex with her up until the 22nd. It was a good 18 months. It was a long time, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Paul Russell, as far as you're aware, hadn't a clue? Asked Mr. Cooper. Not at first he didn't, no, says Thomas Cashman. Was there an occasion where you thought Kaylee might find out? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, I went round there one night. I was on the park walking my dog. My dog was off the lead. The dog chased these kids and they screamed. I put my dog on the lead and gave him a smack on the back. She said to me to come round later in the night. She was a little stressed out because of the incident the day before. I was feeling a bit sorry for her. I went round in the night time and we slept together, says Thomas Cashman. Where did you have sex? Asked Mr. Cooper. In the kitchen, says Thomas Cashman. She was upset about what happened the day before. What had happened? Asked Mr. Cooper. Somebody got shot. 9 times he got shot, says Thomas Cashman. This was the shooting I asked her about. 5 gunshots were discharged, says Mr. Cooper. It was 9. She was the first person over to help him, says Thomas Cashman. This was all on her mind when you met her the following day? Asked Mr. Cooper. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. You told us you went back to the home and you had sex in the kitchen, says Mr. Cooper. We had sex in the kitchen, yeah, says Thomas Cashman. This wasn't a planned event. You met by chance outside and decided in the spur of the moment to have sex in her kitchen, says Mr. Cooper. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. What were you wearing? Asked Mr. Cooper. I can't remember what I was wearing. A tracksuit, something like that, says Thomas Cashman. Did anything happen which made you worry about Kaylee? Asked Mr. Cooper. We didn't have enough time to take our clothes off. We had sex in the kitchen. I was standing there rolling a cigarette, a spliff. I noticed my pants had all white stuff over my pants and the bottom of my t-shirt, my trousers. It was just on the top of my trousers and the bottom of my t-shirt. It was all white stuff, what come off her, says Thomas Cashman. I just looked down and seen it all. I asked for a cloth. I asked for something to wipe it, but it was a lot. I asked her to get my tracksuit bottoms and a t-shirt. I got tracksuit bottoms and a t-shirt off her, says Thomas Cashman. Why were you anxious to change? Asked Mr. Cooper. I was going home to Kaylee. She did not know what was going on, says Thomas Cashman. What clothing were you given? Asked Mr. Cooper. There were just a pair of tracksuit bottoms and a t-shirt, says Thomas Cashman. Cashman also confirms he took the dirty clothing to his sister's house to be laundered. Did you have sex after that? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, I don't think so. Not that time I can remember, says Thomas Cashman. Did Kaylee ever get to know what was going on? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, Kaylee never even knew until I came away and I was in prison. I broke her heart basically when I told her, says Thomas Cashman. How did that make you feel, Mr. Cashman? Asked Mr. Cooper. It wasn't nice. It hurt. I broke my own heart by telling her because I broke her heart, says Thomas Cashman. How was the unidentified witness apart from having sex? Was she loving, tender, or was she abrupt? Asked Mr. Cooper. It was just a bit of fun for me. It weren't about no love. If I was out and about in the area, I'd pop in there. I know it's not nice, but when I felt like I'd sleep with her, says Thomas Cashman. Did she understand the boundaries? Asked Mr. Cooper. It was just going round having fun. The more it went on, the worse it was getting. She was asking me what's going on with us. I was like, what do you mean? I told her I'd never leave Kaylee for her, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then asks about if the witness would get angry. She'd always get a little bit angry and start an argument. I'd leave and I wouldn't go back for a while because I thought it was time to get away from that situation. I'd always go back, I'd see her and she'd get on at me. She'd threaten me with Kaylee to let her know what was going on. She says I couldn't perform when I went round. I was always under so much pressure. I couldn't perform myself because my mind was everywhere. It weren't in the right place. I was going round to try and keep her happy, says Thomas Cashman. She was insistent on telling us about that. You couldn't perform because of the stress. It wasn't particularly a loving relationship from your side, says Mr. Cooper. No, never. The words I'd say to her is, it's just fun, says Thomas Cashman. What did you get the impression that she wanted? Asked Mr. Cooper. She wanted me to herself. She didn't want me to go back with Kaylee. She wanted me to stay with her. She asked me once to move away with her. That's when I thought that's getting a bit bad. I thought enough was enough, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman also says Mr. Russell's brother, Ben Russell, that the witness wanted to move away with her and had spoken about sharing porn content of herself online. Cashman says Paul went round and caused murder with her. She wasn't happy with me a lot. He says at one stage the witness told him she wanted to run away to Marbella with him. It was something I didn't want no part of. I had Kaylee and she was a bit of fun for me. I told her no, says Thomas Cashman. Why did you tell Russell's brother? I just thought it was getting a bit much. She was still with Paul at the time. I thought it was time to tell them about what she was about to do. I wanted to end it, says Thomas Cashman. How did Paul react? Asked Mr. Cooper. Paul went mad. He didn't go mad with me. He didn't know that. He just said, I've caused murder for her and Paul, says Thomas Cashman. Can you clarify what murder means, please? Says Mr. Cooper. A lot of trouble, like stress, trouble, says Thomas Cashman. How did she react to you when she realised she'd caused this trouble? Asked Mr. Cooper. She went mad herself, says Thomas Cashman. The court will remember the WhatsApp messages about the thoughts she had about you, at times wanting to ruin you, and others being infatuated with you. Were you aware she was infatuated with you? Asked Mr. Cooper. I never knew she was that much. She was mentioning stuff from years back, and I couldn't even remember. When she was obsessive with me, I didn't even think it was to that extent, no, says Thomas Cashman. She accepts she was obsessed with you. Did that surprise you? Asked Mr. Cooper. A little bit. I was just thinking to myself, what have I got myself into here? Says Thomas Cashman. Cashman then confirms there was one occasion where he promised to go on holiday with a witness, but he never followed through with it. Mr. Cooper asks, you told the court there came a time when you stopped having sex with her. When was the last time you had sex? I'm not sure. It was sometimes in July, says Mr. Cashman. I want to ask you about the day before the shooting. What sort of things were you doing? Asked Mr. Cooper. The same stuff I was doing every other day. I was stuck in like a rut. I'd wake up, go to my sister's. At this point, Thomas Cashman then takes a sip of water and he continues, just dealing cannabis, my day-to-day activities, dropping a bit of cannabis off or collecting a bit of money, stopping at my mates having a split with them. I was doing that every single day. I was always in and out all the time, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then says there will be a suggestion by the prosecution that Thomas Cashman was scoping things out in order to shoot Joseph Nee. He continues, what do you say about that? Says Mr. Cooper. That's untrue, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cooper then asks about when he went to visit Joseph Nee's house on August the 21st, the day before the shooting. I was at Joseph's mum's house with Joseph, Jamie, Robert, Scott and two of our other friends, says Thomas Cashman, Ryan Conway and David Cheshire. I was in my van, Citroen Berlingo, says Thomas Cashman. He then confirms he owned that van for a couple of months. Were you doing anything that day in connection with scoping out for the shooting in the future? Asked Mr. Cooper. No, I wasn't, says Thomas Cashman. So at this point, the court is adjourned for the day, and Thomas Cashman comes back the next day to continue the questioning. So this will be the end of part 1.